Hey, thanks for coming tonight. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a Pivotal Principal Technology Developer Advocate, and Pivotal are the makers of such fine things as Spring Framework, Spring Boot, Redis, RabbitMQ, Greenplum, huge contributor to Apache Tomcat, huge contributor to the Cloud Foundry core code. You may have heard of us. We call ourselves a tiny little startup operating out of Silicon Valley. Our headquarters is in San Francisco. I am based out of St. Louis. It's the home I never visit because I travel quite a lot. But I do still pay taxes on a house there, so I still call that home. So that's, I guess, worth something. But I blog, not as often as I'd like, but as often as I can at thehecklers.com. And I tweet all the time at MKHeck. Is anyone here on Twitter? Twitter? Okay, 2017. That's where all the action is. I don't know that Twitter will ever turn a profit, but it's a great place to interact with your favorite open source library developers. We're all there, and that's where the party is. So I'm kind of on Twitter from sunup to sundown, and many times in between. Sometimes I have been known to wake up in the middle of the night and grab my phone and tweet. It probably is a rather sad statement on my life, but it is what it is. So, there you go. But Twitter's a great place to be. That's the best way to reach me. I'm very diligent about keeping up with Twitter. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, please do ping me there if you can. Because that's, again, the fastest way to get through. However, for those of you who may not necessarily like being limited to 280 characters now, or you just hate Twitter for whatever reason, I'm also a member of the slightly older and more established social network called Email. Is anyone on Email? Okay, a few more. Like you, I have a half a dozen email addresses, but I always kind of point to these two. mark@thehecklers.com, which, by the way, I have thehecklers.org as well, but .com is my new site I'm kind of converting to because it lets me hopefully eventually blog with more velocity. But mark@thehecklers.com or my company email at mheckler@pivotal.io. I'm not quite as quick to respond on email as I am on Twitter, but I do get around to it, so I do watch that. Yeah, so let's see. Was there anything else I was going to say here? Probably not. Okay, so who am I? I have co-authored a couple books. I have written numerous blog posts and written on various different blogs, and I speak anywhere they'll invite me, and it's always a plus to be invited back. So, if you like what you hear tonight, please do feel free to invite me back, especially during the winter months. The bad news is we have a kind of a short amount of time here tonight. It's somewhat limited. So we won't be able to cover everything that there is to know about Reactive and Spring Framework 5 and Spring Boot 2 and Project Reactor and things like that. But we can start the conversation, right? I can kind of give you some things to chew on and think about, and we can talk and get the good juices going. But the good news is we have an almost unlimited amount of time after the fact. So please do ping me, preferably on Twitter, or if not, on email. And I can talk about this stuff all the time at length, chase you out the door talking about it. So, I won't do that, but happy to discuss anything you might want to discuss. I am a software architect and developer. I have several years. As Paul alluded, I'm an old guy, but I embrace it because that's, I think, a lot of good experience. But we can't hide behind experience, right? There are all kinds of new things coming out all the time, and we fail to learn at our peril. I like to say I'm a seeker of a better way, as are you, or you wouldn't be here this evening giving up your time. But I think as new things come out, we need to know about them. We don't need to implement them because they're new, but we need to know about them because they bring different solution sets to problems that may have been intractable with the solutions that we have previously, that we've exercised previously. So I think it's always very instructive to learn new techniques, new tools, new options that are available, because it's another tool in your toolbox. There is no golden hammer. Sometimes people say, well, why should I convert my Spring MVC apps or my blocking apps to a reactive platform? If it's working for you, you probably shouldn't. If it's working and running and making you money and it's not giving you headaches, leave it in place. And it's a great technology, right? But if you have had a problem set that you just can't quite get your head around with the tools at your disposal, this may give you a way to solve those problems. So, keep looking. As Paul mentioned, I am a Java champion. I should also point out he is as well. Yeah, it's kind of nice. I appreciate the vote of confidence that is named a Java champion based on community input and contributions to the greater Java community. So if you had anything to do with that, including Paul, thank you very much. Appreciate the vote of confidence. So reactive, what is reactive? I think this is a really great money quote from Ross and Stoyanchev, who is on our Project Reactor team. Ross said, in a nutshell, reactive programming is about non-blocking, event-driven applications that scale with a small number of threads with back pressure as a key ingredient that aims to ensure producers do not overwhelm consumers. And there is a lot of information packed into that one statement, so I'm going to unpack a little bit here. First, it's about non-blocking event-driven applications. Even at the operating system level, typically things happen asynchronously. However, the Java programming model, while making it much easier to reason about for us mere mortals, kind of puts an artificial constraint on that. The way that typically you scale in Java is to spin up additional threads. So you'll make a request on a thread, you're blocking, you're waiting for a response, you create another thread, and you create another thread. So you have a lot of threads typically out there kind of hanging, waiting for a response, inactive, if you will, which isn't terribly efficient. So with a reactive approach, you have a smaller number of threads. It's an event-driven type of foundation that allows you to context switch out. There is a cost. Sometimes people say, well, what kind of performance boost do I get with a reactive approach? Wrong question to ask, because at times, depending on your problem set, it may be better performance, it may be worse. But what you do get is scalability, massive scalability, because you're using fewer resources to handle more requests, and you're not just continuing to spin up and exhaust your number of threads. Back pressure is a key ingredient. Sometimes we focus on the asynchronicity of a reactive approach, and we say, well, we have asynchronous message queues. That's right, you do. But there's no way in an asynchronous message queue to provide back pressure the way a reactive programming model will allow that. And I'll kind of get into and explain that as we go, but suffice it to say that with a reactive model, a slower consumer of messages or data packets coming down the pipeline can push back, can say, look, I can't take that much. Just give me two elements, give me 5 elements, give me 10 elements. And that allows you to not necessarily eliminate the problem of a faster producer, but it allows you to take that problem and deal with it at the producer level versus pushing it out to the client where you have very little control over that. So it gives you a lot more tools at your disposal to optimize. The reactive, actually, let me back up just a little bit. I'm a history nut, so you're going to get a little history lesson tonight. Hope you don't mind. If you do, too bad. Just kidding. But I think it's kind of instructive because it gives you a little bit of context for how we got here. Several years ago, Eric Meyer at Microsoft Research and Development came up with the idea for reactive extensions for Java. No, .NET, just kidding, .NET. And that idea, that implementation kind of spread across various different platforms. You had JavaScript, RxJS, yes, and RxJava, of course, was created primarily by Netflix. But you had a lot of reactive extensions that kind of proliferated throughout, C++, what have you. At some point down the road, I think enough people kind of caught on that this was a real thing. This was something that was significant and we needed to embrace and implement. But of course, you can't do anything in our industry unless you have a manifesto, right? So of course, the Reactive Manifesto came out, and all the previous history was erased because everything starts in the manifesto. I'm kidding, sort of. But where are most of your delays incurred? They're in the interactions, right? They're in the streams, if you will. And a lot of very sharp people from various different organizations got together to form the reactive streams specification to create it. So you had contributors from Pivotal, from Twitter, from Kazing, from Red Hat, from TypeSafe, nay, Lightbend. And you had a lot of various contributors who said, look, we can solve this problem individually, and we can make it all non-interoperable, but that seems a little foolish. So the reactive stream specification kind of came together and codified a certain basic level of agreement. And the reactive streams initiative itself consists of the specification, kind of makes sense, the API, and a TCK. So a technology compatibility kit is provided, open source, so that each different provider of a reactive streams implementation can test their implementation against that. They can implement it entirely differently, but they can test and validate that they are interoperable. So things like Akka Streams or RxJava 2.x or Project Reactor, these are all interoperable, and they're verifiably interoperable. So the reactive streams specification itself consists of 4 interfaces, just 4. It's very simple. There's a publisher interface, which kind of is self-explanatory. You have a subscriber interface, which is what obviously is used to subscribe to a publisher. The subscription is the contract that's provided when a subscription is entered into a relationship from the subscriber to the publisher. And then you have a processor, which implements both the subscriber and the publisher interface so that it can in turn manipulate that information coming in and then pass it on downstream. It's very simple, deceptively simple, but it's at a very low level of granularity, which typically means that anytime you want to use something involving reactive streams, if you don't use a particular implementation, you're going to be rewriting a lot of code over and over and over again. You can do that, probably not the best use of your time, because there are a lot of, again, very sharp people who are going forward and trying to make very good implementations of this so that you can take them at a much higher level of abstraction and use them and reuse them. Again, Akka Streams is one, RxJava 2.x, Project Reactor, and there are different implementations verifiably interoperable. Even Java 9 with Java Util Concurrent Flow is implementing these interfaces as well. But again, it's at that very low interface level. So to make use of it, you typically would require an add-on library or want to use an add-on library. Project Reactor is one of those options. This is a pivotal project, but it's fully open source. You aren't required to use Spring to use this. It's the other way around. The Spring uses Project Reactor as a dependency, not the other way. So you can use Project Reactor in any Java application. Probably you will want to use Spring anyway, so that's not an issue, but you can use it independently of Spring. And this is something that I feel like we're doing really right, and I sometimes forget to mention this. I'm biased, admittedly, but there are some vendor offerings who have embraced the reactive space, and I won't name names, but they're very good, they're very solid, but they tend to kind of approach you as a developer and say, look, we know you have 10, 20 years of experience in this model, throw it away. Do things entirely different or else you can't get there from here. And that's incredibly frustrating for me because I feel like when you've gained 10 years of hard-won experience, to just throw that away and start fresh is a little frustrating. It's also really frustrating when you have people who can't rotate from project to project easily. So it's very good if you can reuse and build upon knowledge that's already there. In Pivotal, we could have thrown away everything we'd done with the Spring framework, with Spring MVC, but instead we just added more work for ourselves and created parallel modules. So Spring MVC is in parallel with what we call Spring Web Flux. It gives you kind of the best of both worlds. And if you're coming from a Spring MVC world, you're not going to see anything that's terribly jarring. It's a very easy transition to a fully reactive model. If you're coming from a functional reactive background, that's fine too. We have you covered there as well, and as you'll see when I start coding. So coming back to the slide, actually, Reactor is fully non-blocking. If you're used to Java 8 constructs like streams and completable futures and lambdas, you're not going to have a hard grade to go up with that either, because this is a natural extension of those concepts, which makes it really nice. It takes the concept of a publisher and specializes that, because a publisher can mean any of a number of things, 0 to n values coming back. In many cases, we expect a return value, right? That's t. So we'll expect an object of type t to come back from a method or to address it at a 1 level, 1 or 0 level. And that is what's called a mono in Project Reactor speak. So if you have a publisher which will produce 0 or 1 values, that's a mono. If you have a publisher which produces 0 to n values, maybe it's a handful of values, maybe it's hundreds of values, maybe it's an indeterminate number of values over an indeterminate amount of time. That's what we call a flux. So that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you deal with different kinds of publishers. there are going to be some operations that make sense for both, some that make sense for one or the other. And that allows us to specialize that quite nicely, I think. Non-blocking interprocess communication, back pressure ready network engines, which again, I kind of explained, gives you the capability to deal with that at the producer or the publisher level. And it also incorporates support for things like WebSocket and server-sent events and what have you. So, and I know the breakdown of the time, because once I launch into code, I really don't want to stop. So should we take a quick break and then come back and just launch into it? Is this a good time? Because this, I don't want this to happen and then get halfway in and then stop.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So you mentioned about those pieces.
Yes.
What is the significance of this Reactor project versus RxJ Java, which follows RxJS, as you do all the same things?
Well,
coming from the Myers RX.
right. I think it's just a matter of, well, one, I mean, we certainly cross-pollinate. David Karnock, who's the lead of RxJava, is also a contributor to Project Reactor. So I think we've got a really good relationship there in terms of trading knowledge back and forth. And we do try to make it very similar in capabilities, as well as fully interoperable too. But I think the advantage that you have is that Project Reactor is a bit further down the line because, and ironically, because it's a bit newer. With RxJava, you have one, that they're still supporting and will be for some time to come, and two, which has kind of leapt forward, but it's been to some degree, I don't want to say constrained, but certainly there's a legacy element there as well. Project Reactor is fairly fresh, even though it's been kind of in the works for the last 4 years maybe, but it's still very fresh and up till very recently was still evolving the API because it wasn't in production. It wasn't generally available, which gave us in many ways a kind of an advantage to tweak. Well, this doesn't work quite right, but we're not tied to it because it's not GA yet. So we can scrap that or revisit that and kind of tune that to the way it makes sense to call that operation or to implement that operation. So RxJava is an excellent option. But I think just a matter of if you're wanting kind of the sharpest edges, not in a bad way, but in terms of the best tool set, you're probably going to be looking at Reactor. So, but again, all of them are good. I mean, if you talk about Akka Streams is an excellent option, but it's certainly a different model. So if you're coming from a Spring perspective, I think this is just, it's like hand in glove. It's a very easy transition to make and still gain all that power. So that's the hands down answer. If you're not coming from a Spring perspective, it gets a little tougher to tease out. You want to take 5 and then come back and then we launch into code?
I think that's good because we won't take a break.
Yeah.